Hi families! Today I'm going to be teaching you how to round decimals. This strategy comes from Eureka 5th grade Unit 1, Lesson 7. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is pull out your template, which is called the hundreds to thousands place value chart. And that can be found in your students' workbook that they bring home each night. It can also be found in the PDF that's on the classroom website under Document Library. The whole student workbook is on there in PDF. So what the students learned today was how to rename their number in different ways strategically so that it helps them with their rounding. So for example, the number 9 and 975 thousandths can be written like this. And this is the most obvious way, the way that students most often write their numbers. 9 and 975 thousandths. However, there are many other ways that they can rename this number. So if your student was to divide this number into tenths, there wouldn't just be 9. If they cut up this big number into as many tenths as they could find, there would actually be 99 tenths in it, with some left over, with 7 hundredths and 5 thousandths. Likewise, if they were to cut it up into hundredths, there would be 997 hundredths and a few left over. And finally, there would be 9,975 thousandths in this number. So when students become comfortable renaming this is really going to help them to be able to break down their number into these different place values, to recognize the different values that are hiding inside their number, and that will allow them to round to these different place values. So we use a vertical number line to round. So I'm just going to flip over my whiteboard and show you how to draw this thing. So it's just a vertical line. And students are being given this number line right now, but they will be asked to create it themselves. So it's good to get them used to doing that. So I'm just going to write my number again. My number was 9 and 975 thousandths. I'll go ahead and write it up here at the top. And we're going to round this number to several different places using this vertical number line. So first I'm going to go ahead and round it to the nearest 1. So if I'm looking at my chart, I'm going to find the row that most helps me do that. And obviously I'm going to use this first row because it tells me how many ones I have in this number, the maximum number of ones. So I've got 9. That's going to be my bottom boundary. 9 ones. I'm going to write out the unit form and just the standard form. And then for my top bound, this would be if I'm rounding down. I would round down to 9, but for my top boundary, I'm just going to skip count by 1. So that's going to be 10 ones. I'll write out the unit form and the standard form. The next thing that I need to do is to figure out the midpoint, because that will tell me if my number needs to be rounded up to 10 ones or down to 9 ones. So I always write my midpoint down here. Okay, so at this point, I encourage students to add another place value. Not what they see up here, but just add a 0 afterwards to see what's hanging out next door, because that's really going to help them find the midpoint, which is actually 9 ones and 5 tenths. 9.5. And without this extra 0, that's a lot harder for them to recognize that they can actually skip count by 5s to find, or by 5 tenths to find the midpoint. Once I've done that, I'm actually going to look and see how many ones I have and look at that next place value to figure out, is the tenths telling me to round up or down? So my midpoint is 9 ones and 5 tenths, but in my actual number I have 9 ones and 9 tenths, which is somewhere up here. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. 9 ones, 9 tenths equals 9.9. So to finally prove show what the answer is, I'm just going to circle what I'm rounding to. Because it's above the midpoint, I know that I'm going to round up to 10 ones. Okay, that was rounding to the nearest 1. Next, let's round to the nearest tenth. Okay, so my tenths, let's flip on over. Which one of these rows would help me most when coming up with my boundaries? I'm going to choose number 2 because this is the maximum number of tenths that I have. So that's going to be my bottom boundary. 99 tenths equals 9 and 9 tenths. I'm going to go ahead and add that 0 because I think I'll need it for my midpoints. And then I'm just going to skip count up 1 tenth. I end up with 100 tenths. And students might be tempted just to write 10, but go ahead and put those extra decimal points out because that's really going to help. For my midpoints, halfway between 9 and 90 hundredths and 10 and 0 hundredths, I'm going to actually end up with 9.95. So 99 tenths and 5 hundredths. And that's the same as 9 and 95 hundredths. Okay, now I just go back to my number. Do I have more hundredths than 95 or less? Up here I've got 9 and 97 hundredths, so it's going to be somewhere around here. I'm going to have 9 tenths, 7 hundredths. Oh, I'm sorry, 99 tenths and 7 hundredths. Also the same as 9 and 97 hundredths. So once again, I'm going to round up to 100 tenths. Once again, we are rounding up to the nearest tenths. So I could also write this in standard form, just 10.0 if I wanted to. Let's keep on going and round to the nearest hundredth now. Okay, nearest hundredth. This time I'm using my third row, 997 hundredths. It's my bottom boundary. Nine and 97 hundredths, 998 hundredths, 9 and 98 hundredths. Okay, midway between, I'm going to add my extra 0 so I can figure that out. Got 997 hundredths, 5 thousandths. Great. 990 or 9.9 975. 9.975. Okay, it's a 7. My number, which I actually erased, 975. Oh, look. It's actually my midpoint. So students know that when rounding, no matter if they're rounding with decimals or whole numbers, when you're at the midpoint, when you're at the 5, you actually round up. So once again, we're going to round up to 998 hundredths. If I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, I could just write that 9.98. Okay, finally, we're actually going to go the opposite direction because students will get questions asking them to round to the nearest tenth as well. Or to the nearest 10, I should say. And sometimes they get confused because they don't see a 10 here. So it's important that they recognize that there's just a 0 there. So that 0 is going to be their bottom boundary. 0 tens equals 0 up here. 1 10 equals 10. Midway points, 0 tens. 5 ones equals 5. Oh, look, I don't have any 10s, but I have 9 ones. So 0 tens, 9 ones. It's going to be up here. 0 tens, 9 ones equals 9. So I'm going to round. That right on up to 110. Only other tricky thing that they're going to find is sometimes the number is something like this, and I ask them to round to the nearest thousandth. And students will get a little confused because they don't see any thousandth there. So just encourage them to write a 0, and that 0 is our bottom bound, okay? And the 1,000ths would be their top boundary. And then they would see that that their bottom boundary would be their actual number, so they would just keep it the same and just write that 0 for the answer. Okay, last thing I'm going to do is walk you through our exit ticket for this lesson so you can see an example of what the book is having them do. Okay. It says, use the table to round the number to the given places. Label the number lines and circle the rounded value, 8 and 546 thousandths. So you can see how they've already renamed this number in multiple ways so that students can choose which one gives them the right information for the answer. So hundredths, I'm going to go ahead and use this information for my hundredths. This number is my bottom boundary, 854 hundredths. You can also write that in standard form as 8.54. Top boundary is just one above that, 855 hundredths. 8.55. And midway between, I add my zeros so that helps, I'm finding my midpoint at 854 hundredths 5 thousandths. I'm writing all this out right now, but your student will eventually not need to write out the unit form once they understand how to find this midpoint more easily. Okay, so I've got all my information out there. I'm going to look back up at my number. I actually have 8 and 854 thousandths, or hundredths, and 6 thousandths. So that's right above here. I've got 854 hundredths, 6 thousandths. That's the same as 8 and 546 thousandths. So I'm going to round up there, and to show my answer, I'm just going to go ahead and circle it. Okay, so rounding the nearest hundredth, it's actually 855 hundredths. Okay, tens, nearest 10. This is one of those tricky ones that I was mentioning. Students may not recognize that there's an actually just a 0 right there. So 0 tens is our bottom boundary. 1 10 is our top boundary. 0 tens, 5 ones is our midpoint. I have 0 tens and 8 ones. It's up here. I'm going to write it off to the right. 0 tens, 8 ones. So rounding the nearest 10, it's actually just 1 10 equals 10. So the best way to teach this at home, other than just practicing it, is to talk about midpoints. Is ask your child to start coming up with, just to verbally tell you the midpoint between two numbers. So you can start off easy and say midpoint between 0 and 10, they'd say 5. Midpoints between 14 and 16, they'd say 15. But eventually get to the point where they're going to have to go to the next place value. So the midpoint between 7 and 8 is 7.5. The midpoint between 7.6 and 7.7 is 7.65. Once they can start seeing that adding that 5 gets them the midpoint in a lot of cases, that will really help them out. You can also use this chart to help. Students have this chart, like I said, both in their student workbook, in the screen book, and they have it online in PDF form on the classroom website. So please practice this at home. Let me know if there's anything else I can help you with. If you'd love to make me a video, if you'd love me to make me a video of some other strategy, let me know, and I'll get that up there as soon as possible. Thank you.